getting harder to share sermons. I got to tell you, once upon a time, you look at a text, you try and find the truth, and you share that truth. And sometimes when you look into the truths of the Torah and you see the truths of the world, it's challenging, and you try and figure it out. And there are some days that it's more than challenging, and I feel that again. The weight on my shoulders, the way I'm sure many of you feel about some of these things. You know, before coming here, some of you might remember that for 9 years, I was a rabbi of a synagogue in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. And when it came to Dr. King's weekend to preach in Roswell, Georgia, where folks were witnesses very differently than how lots of folks were witnesses, where folks were part of a landscape, and they would come up to me and say, "Oh, Rabbi Green, you northerner, you weren't there. It's hard to really know. It was much more complicated." And being this young rabbi at the time, and a little bit of an idealist that I refused to give up, I would acknowledge that I wasn't there. But a truth is a truth. And this isn't the first time in America or throughout history or Jewish history where people have struggled. So I grew up with hearing all about Soviet Jewry. And we share about this from time to time, and our younger friends have no idea what I'm talking about, really. But I remember my bar mitzvah, and we had a chair reserved with a little sign on it for Mikhail Adel. Mikhail Adel, some refusnik, right? The word that says you were refused a visa, you couldn't emigrate from the Soviet Union, you couldn't go to Israel, you couldn't go to America, and there was all of these kinds of oppression. So I remember all of that and hearing about it and talking to rabbis who are, smuggling Bibles and blue jeans, and because that was really expensive in the Soviet Union, we needed to send them blue jeans. And folks coming back talking about all of the challenges and the hardships, and here's my sign for Mikhail Adel, because he's not allowed to become bar mitzvah in the Soviet Union, so I and maybe a few hundred other kids from Long Island, we're going to do that and save a chair on the bima for Mikhail Adel. By the way, when an internet comes around, I look for Mikhail Adel. Apparently it's a name like John Smith. I have no idea who this kid is, but I was really trying so hard. I remember posters that say, "Let my people go." And I see posters for Achdut, about unity. And I remember the Soviet Jewry seders where we had to make sure that there's an end to oppression. All of that stuff I sent to the American Jewish Archives. And I've had some of my own experiences and my own teachers that helped me to see the world not just in a way that's all about me, which I think also is an important lesson, not just for Jewish kids, but for human beings. And little by little, I start to understand what my tradition is asking of me. In the book of Exodus, "I am the eternal your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage." That's our memory. We start there. "You shall have one standard for the stranger and the citizen alike. The stranger and the citizen alike, for I, the eternal, am your God," it says in Leviticus. "When you harvest your land, don't reap all the way to the edges. Leave it for the poor, the widow, and the stranger." In the Gemara, our rabbis taught that for the sake of peace, the non-Jewish poor should be supported as we support the poor of Israel. The non-Jewish sick should be visited as we support and we visit the sick of Israel. The non-Jewish dead should be buried as we bury the dead of Israel. But we don't only have to look at these ancient sources to find something that fits. We take these ideas and we bring them into our lives so other teachers can help us see something for our day. When it's time to talk about Dr. King and Jews, we often turn to Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He wrote that racial or religious bigotry must be recognized for what it is: blasphemy. The problem is not only how to do justice to the colored people, speaking in the 1960s, it is also how to stop the profaning of God's name by dishonoring the Negro's name. And then there's Dr. King. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the creative light of altruism or the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment. Life's persistent and most urgent question is, what are you doing for others? What are you doing for others? I can read these texts. I can tell you what's in my heart. I'm going to read another rabbi's text. There was a rabbi who in 1963 was the one who was speaking immediately before Dr. King at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This poor rabbi speaking right before Dr. King. Rabbi Prince, who was from Germany, and he followed Mahalia Jackson, by the way, which made it even harder. He ended up in a congregation in Newark, New Jersey. And this is his words, and it's far better than anything I can tell you. So here's tonight's sermon. I speak to you as an American Jew. As Americans, we share the profound concern of millions of people about the shame and disgrace of inequality and injustice, which make a mockery of the great American idea. As Jews, we bring to this great demonstration in which thousands of us participate proudly a twofold experience, one of the Spirit and one out of history. In the realm of the Spirit, our fathers taught us thousands of years ago that when God created human beings, he created this individual as everybody's neighbor. Neighbor is not a geographic term, it's a moral concept. I'll say that one again. Neighbor is not a geographic term, it's a moral concept. It means our collective responsibility for the preservation of man's dignity and integrity. From our Jewish historic experience of 3,500 years, we say, our ancient history began with slavery and the yearning for freedom. During the Middle Ages, my people lived for 1,000 years in the ghettos of Europe. Our modern history begins with the proclamation of emancipation. It is for these reasons that it is not merely sympathy and compassion for the black people of America that motivates us. It is above all and beyond all such sympathies and emotions, a sense of complete identification and solidarity born of our own painful historic experience. When I, says Rabbi Prince, when I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people which created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remain silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers, he said. America must not remain silent. Not merely black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act from the president down to the humblest of us. And not for the sake of the Negro, not for the sake of the black community, but for the sake of the image, the idea, and the aspiration of America itself. Our children, yours and mine, in every school across the land, every morning pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands. They, the children, speak fervently and innocently of this land as the land of liberty and justice for all. The time, I believe, has come to work together, for it is not enough to pray together. It is not enough to hope together. To work together that this children's oath pronounced every morning from Maine to California, from north to south, may become a glorious, unshakable reality in the morally renewed and united America. That's a sermon. And he said it in 1963. Where have we been? Where are we going? The classic line of God's interest in where we are is that question of ayeka. Where are you? Simple. Adam thinks he can hide from God. Somehow he's trying to hide and not be found, but God's not looking for him as a person. God is looking for him as a human being, not where he is, but where is his presence in the world. And there's one answer to which we should strive. Hineni, I am here. Not to be the spectator, not to be the onlooker, not to be silent, and not just to criticize on Facebook, but to roll up our sleeves and be God's partner and bring peace and justice to our land and our world. We turn back